It started with a ring that would change everything. I had just come home after a long, exhausting day, hoping for a quiet evening in my modest house, a place I had worked so hard to maintain, my sanctuary from the world. The call came in, and at first I didn't recognize the number. But the moment I answered, the tone of the voice on the other end froze me in place. "Mr. Anderson, this is Officer Ramirez. Your house, it's on fire." Those words didn't really register at first. My mind tried to rationalize them, maybe a small kitchen fire, a car in the garage, something minor. But as the officer continued, my stomach sank deeper and deeper. "The fire department is on scene. The house is fully engulfed. I'm afraid there's nothing left. You need to get here immediately." I felt my knees buckle. I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen counter to keep from falling. My heart raced and my thoughts scattered in every direction at once. "What do you mean nothing's left?" I just left it this morning," I stammered, barely holding myself together. "Sir, I understand this is difficult. Just get here safely," the officer said, trying to keep his voice calm. But it was too late. The image of my home, the furniture, the photographs, the things I had collected over decades, flashed before my eyes like a film reel being consumed by flames. I jumped into my car, ignoring the streetlights, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing with questions. How could this happen? Did someone break in? Was it arson? My neighborhood, my safe little world, suddenly seemed like a war zone. As I drove, I could see the glow of the fire from blocks away. Smoke billowed high into the sky, black and suffocating. The acrid smell of burning wood and plastic carried down the street even before I reached my house. Neighbors had gathered, faces pale, eyes wide with shock. Phones were out, capturing every horrifying angle of the destruction. I wanted to run straight into the fire, to grab something, anything, but the officers held the perimeter, yelling for everyone to stay back. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward what was left of my life. Flames licked the sky, twisting the roof into impossible shapes. The walls had collapsed in several areas, and the fire had eaten through everything. I recognized the garden hose, charred and useless, and a scorched swing set that my nephew loved. The entire front yard smelled of smoke and ash. My heart broke in ways I didn't think were possible. Officer Ramirez approached me, his helmet still on, soot smudged across his face. "We found someone inside during the fire," he said carefully. "A homeless man. He got in through a side entrance. He was trying to stay warm. He accidentally started the fire." I froze. My mind refused to process it. A homeless man trying to stay warm. I wanted to scream, to ask why, to demand how this could happen to me, but there was nothing to do. My house, my memories, all gone in a few hours. I walked around the perimeter, dodging smoldering debris, trying to identify something familiar, anything that survived. Photographs, furniture, my personal files, nothing. The fire had been merciless. Neighbors whispered amongst themselves, offering condolences that felt almost meaningless in the moment. One neighbor, Mrs. Patel, hugged me and whispered, "I can't imagine, I'm so sorry." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was tight with grief. Then the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Officer Ramirez, it was the insurance company. My heart sank further because even in this chaos, I knew the next battle had already begun. I answered, my voice trembling. "Hello, this is Mr. Anderson." "Mr. Anderson," a calm, almost too measured voice said on the other end. "This is the claims department. We understand there's been a fire at your property. We'll need you to provide a statement and documentation of your damages." My blood ran cold. Documentation, statement. My house was still smoldering. My personal files, all my receipts, my proof of ownership, my everything, they were gone. I wanted to shout, to tell them I couldn't provide what I didn't have, but the voice on the line continued. "To process your claim, we'll need detailed inventories, photographs, proof of maintenance, and confirmation of security measures." I sat on the curb, staring at the blackened ruins of my home, trying to hold back tears. I can't," I whispered. "It's all gone, everything." There was a pause, and then the voice continued, almost rehearsed. "I understand, sir, but without this information, your claim may be denied." Denied. The word echoed in my head like a hammer blow. Denied after everything I had been through, after my house was destroyed through no fault of my own. I couldn't even think straight. The fire, the loss, the shock, all mingled with a growing anger I didn't know how to control. I looked up at the sky where the smoke still swirled, and I realized something profound. This was only the beginning. The fire had taken my house, but the battle with the insurance company was already looming. They would scrutinize every detail, question every decision I had ever made, and if I wasn't careful, blame me for a disaster that wasn't my fault. As I sat there on the curb, surrounded by neighbors, police officers, and the lingering heat of the ruins, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go quietly. I couldn't, not after losing everything. I dialed the number again, preparing myself for the fight ahead. The calm voice on the other end didn't know it yet, but this homeowner was about to take a stand. One phone call, one document, one argument at a time. And in that moment, as the sun began to set behind the smoldering wreckage of my life, I made a promise to myself. I would not be blamed for this. I would make them pay attention. I would fight back. The next morning felt unreal, like I'd woken up inside someone else's nightmare. The ash settled on everything like a slow, gray snow, and the neighborhood moved with a careful hush, as if afraid to wake whatever ghosts the fire had left behind. I barely slept. I kept replaying the firefighter's words and the insurance agent's chillingly calm request for documentation. I needed answers, and the only place to find them was at the wreckage. When I arrived, the scene had the orchestration of official procedure, caution tape fluttering in the wind, fire investigators with clipboards and cameras, and a corroded smell that clung to my clothes long after I left. The fire chief, a broad-shouldered man named Ellis, greeted me with a solemn nod. He wore a protective mask pushed down around his neck. Soot marked his sleeves like a badge of hard work. "We've combed through the structure," he said quietly. "We found evidence of an open flame source near the side entryway. There was a man inside, appears to be homeless. He told us he came in to get warm. He had a newspaper and something to light it with." My chest tightened. I wanted to rage at the injustice, to yell at the man for causing this, but my mind kept returning to a different place. The desperation that pushes someone to risk everything for warmth. Chief Ellis saw the conflict on my face and looked away for a moment. "We ran through possibilities," he continued. "From what we can tell, the ignition started in that corner. It spread fast because of the kindling-like material inside the shed and old upholstery in the living room. It's tragic." There was no sign of accelerants or foul play beyond the accidental ignition. "Was he drunk? Hi," I asked without thinking. I needed a target for my hurt. "He was cold and disoriented," the chief said, choosing his words carefully. "We're running IDs and trying to get medical history. For now, it looks accidental. He was breathing when we found him. EMTs transported him for treatment." He hesitated, then added, "He said he was just trying to keep warm." It doesn't absolve the outcome, but it does change the motive. It wasn't planned. I walked the perimeter again, trailing my fingers along the yellow tape as if it could stitch me back into the life I'd lost. A charred picture frame caught my eye, the portrait of my late wife, half melted and blackened at the edges. My hands trembled when I knelt and picked up the remnants. I cradled it like a relic, and for a moment the grief swallowed everything else. People kept saying kind things, but nothing could stitch the hole inside me. The investigators asked me questions in methodical bursts, the kind that sound clinical but pierce like cold needles. When had I last been in the house? Who had keys? Had I reported any security issues? Did I have an alarm? I answered as best I could. It felt surreal to recite these logistical details while wearing my grief like a second skin. Later, a fire investigator named Morales pulled me aside. He showed me a folder with diagrams and close-up photographs, char patterns, burn depth, collapse points. The way they cataloged destruction into neat boxes and bullet points was almost cruel. It reduced my lifetime into evidence for a report. "You did everything by the book?" Morales asked. "Yes," I said. "I kept the yard clear. I fixed the roof last year. There were no open flames inside when I left." My voice cracked. "I locked the doors." He looked at me with the kind of sympathy I had begun to crave. "That's what we document. We'll note the entry point. We'll describe the ignition source as accidental and human-caused. That's the factual finding." "What does that mean for the man we found?" I asked. "Is he in trouble?" "If he cooperates and if the circumstances hold, it'll be treated as an accidental cause. The DA may choose to file charges if negligence is suspected, but that's separate. From a fire investigation standpoint, we don't see intent to harm." He tapped a line on the report and nodded toward a sentence that read, "Cause, accidental, human ignition source, origin, southeast side entry, contributing factors, combustibles, lack of immediate suppression." I left the officers with the report and the numbness that comes from receiving a verdict you didn't ask for but needed anyway. At least now there was a formal explanation, not closure, but a foundation. The phrase, human ignition source, floated in the back of my head like a stone. It pinned me between anger and an odd, complicated sorrow for the stranger who had both warmed himself and destroyed my life. Word spread fast. Within hours, neighbors, some who had not spoken to me in months, came by with coffee, casseroles, and questions. They stood awkwardly at the tape line, trying to help without being intrusive. I appreciated the gestures, but the givenness of my loss made every small kindness feel both huge and tragically insufficient. Meanwhile, the man who'd started the fire was in a hospital bed somewhere on the outskirts of town, wrapped in blankets and bandages, a shadow of a person. I wanted to visit, to look him in the eye, to ask why, but there were practical things to do. Reports to sign, the insurance company to appease, and an overwhelming mountain of logistics that came with owning property. The life I'd known had been shredded into forms and procedures. Back at the scene, a neighbor named Connor, who was a journalist for the local paper, approached me with a notebook and a hesitant expression. "If you're comfortable," he said, "I can write about what happened. It might help bring attention, maybe speed things up with the insurance." I hesitated. The thought of my private ruin splashed across a headline felt raw. But there was a practical hunger tugging at me. Exposure might mean leverage. "Do it," I said at last. "But please don't make the homeless man sound like a villain. He's part of this story, but so am I." That night, the investigators left their cones of light and their tents. The charred skeleton of my home settled into a hollow hush. I sat across the street on a lawn chair, the cold creeping in, and tried to make sense of the day. A small TV in my neighbor's window played the evening news. I caught snippets about the fire, about the man who'd sought warmth and accidentally set off a tragedy. I thought about homeowners I'd seen on social media, the ones who posted their insurance wins and renovations with gleaming smiles. Now I understood how thin the veil was between stability and disaster. A split second, a stray ember, and everything can flip. As the house cooled and the stars pricked the sky, a reporter's voice and a camera light faded from the background, and an officer's clipboard closed with a soft, final sound. The fire's arc was closing, but my battle was only beginning. The investigators had done what they could, documented the facts, explained the likely chain of events, and recorded the accidental ignition. But the official report was a double-edged sword. It gave truth to my version of events. Yes, the fire started accidentally. Yes, a homeless man was inside, but it also fed the insurance company's hunger for details they could use to frame a denial. I cradled the charred photo of my wife and placed it gently into my jacket. The investigator's stamp of accidental might help me, or it might become an inconvenient footnote for a claims adjuster to twist into a reason to deny. Either way, I realized I needed to be ready. I would get a copy of that report, file it away, and prepare to fight the slow bureaucracy that would follow. Because now I knew the truth could be written down, but it still needed someone to stand up and make sure people read it the right way. And I would be that person. The smoke was still settling, and the acrid tang of burnt wood clung to my clothes as I walked back to my car. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, but I ignored it until I could catch my breath. Eventually, I braced myself and called the insurance company. My hands were shaking, my voice hoarse from the panic and grief that had been building since the fire. "Hello, this is Daniel Anderson. I need to report a total loss. My house burned down last night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end, then a calm, polite voice responded. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Rachel Miller, your claims officer. I'm very sorry to hear about your loss. Let's start with some basic information so we can open your claim file." At first, her tone was professional but empathetic. For a fleeting moment, I thought I might actually get help. I described the fire, the involvement of the homeless man, the police report, and the fire investigation. As I spoke, Rachel typed notes with mechanical precision, asking questions I didn't fully understand. The square footage of my home, the type of roofing, the age of appliances, even whether I had replaced my furnace recently. I don't have some of this information," I stammered. "It's all gone." She paused, as if considering my words carefully. "I understand, Mr. Anderson. We'll need as much information as possible. Photographs, previous inspection reports, receipts for renovations or maintenance, documentation of any security measures you had in place. This is standard procedure to ensure a smooth claim process." I felt my stomach twist. Photographs, receipts, inspection reports, everything I'd worked so hard to maintain was now a pile of ashes behind me. I didn't know how I could possibly provide what had been destroyed. My frustration started bubbling beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'll try. I'll do whatever I can," I said, my voice breaking. Rachel nodded, her tone neutral. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I'll email you the forms and a list of required documents. Once we receive them, we can proceed with the claim. In the meantime, please keep all correspondence and any records related to the fire." I hung up and stared at the phone. Keep records, keep receipts, keep evidence of things that no longer existed. The words felt like a cruel joke, but I tried to push down my anger. This was the start of what I could already tell would be a battle. Over the next few hours, I gathered what little I could. I took photographs of the charred remains of my home, the collapsed roof, the burnt furniture, the scorched personal items. I scribbled down what I remembered about furniture, electronics, and personal belongings that had been destroyed. Every note I wrote felt insufficient, like I was trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon. The next day, I received an email from Rachel. The tone had shifted slightly. It was polite but had an edge of bureaucratic detachment. Attached was a list of requirements. Complete inventory of destroyed items with estimated values, proof of purchase for all items, photographs of the property before the fire, documentation of security measures, including locks and alarms, statement explaining how the fire started. I read the list over and over. My hands shook. Some of it I could manage, photographs of the charred remains, a detailed statement about what I remembered, but receipts, proof of purchase, pre-fire photos, they were gone. Every bank account record, every warranty, every bill had been lost in the flames. It felt impossible. I called Rachel back, my frustration finally surfacing. Rachel, I don't have these documents. They were all in the house. I understand, Mr. Anderson, she said, her tone still calm, still professional. But underneath the politeness, I sensed a subtle barrier forming, like she was already anticipating ways to deny me. Without them, processing your claim will be difficult. We may require statements from vendors or copies from your bank records. This is standard procedure for total loss claims. I felt my heart sink. She said it so easily, as if it were nothing, as if my life had not been reduced to ashes overnight. So, you're saying my claim could be denied? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I can't make any promises, Mr. Anderson, she said. We need documentation to process the claim properly. Once we have it, we'll move forward. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. The weight of the situation pressed down on me. Not only had I lost my home, but now I was being told that without documents I didn't have, the very company I relied on might refuse to pay. I had expected support, not suspicion. Days passed. I emailed copies of whatever I could salvage, photos of charred items, statements from neighbors who had seen the fire, the police report, the fire investigation report. I made countless phone calls to banks, appliance stores, and furniture companies, trying to reconstruct proof of ownership. Every step felt like running a marathon with my legs tied together. Each time I called Rachel for updates, her responses were polite but unyielding. We're reviewing the documents, Mr. Anderson. Please provide additional proof of ownership for the appliances and electronics. Also, clarify the security measures in place. The tension was relentless. Every word felt like a carefully placed obstacle. The stress seeped into every corner of my life. I barely ate, I barely slept, and every interaction with Rachel chipped away at my patience. It was as if the system itself was designed to punish me for being a victim. One afternoon, I asked a question I had been dreading. Rachel, am I being blamed for this fire? There was a long pause. Finally, she said, I'm not saying anyone is at fault, Mr. Anderson, but insurance policies require that homeowners take reasonable precautions. The documentation you provide will help determine if the policy covers this event. The words hit me like a punch. Reasonable precautions. My home had been locked, my roof repaired, my heating system functioning, yet here I was, sitting on ashes and being subtly blamed for someone else's mistake. My chest tightened, my jaw clenched. The battle had begun, and it was already clear. This wasn't going to be easy. That evening, I walked past the remains of my house. The fire had reduced it to a blackened skeleton, and I could see the charred remnants of walls that had once held family photographs, furniture, and memories. I whispered to the wind, to the ashes, and to myself, I will not be blamed for this. I will not be ignored. The insurance company, polite and professional, had unwittingly drawn a line in the sand. And I was ready to cross it. By the fourth day after the fire, I had realized something terrifying. The insurance company was no longer just slow or bureaucratic. They were starting to blame me. It started subtly in their careful choice of words, but I noticed it instantly. Each call, each email carried a pointed implication. Perhaps the fire could have been prevented if I had taken more precautions. I dialed Rachel's number yet again, my hands shaking with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. My jaw ached from clenching my teeth during the endless phone calls. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I had to defend myself. Mr. Anderson, Rachel said, her voice deceptively calm, we're reviewing the documents you submitted. There are some concerns we need to address, specifically security measures. The fire investigation notes that the entry point was unsecured. How was the door locked? My blood ran cold. Unsecured, the door was locked. I double-checked it every night. I didn't leave it open. My voice cracked as the anger I had been holding back finally surfaced. You can't seriously blame me for a homeless man accidentally lighting a newspaper inside my house. There was a brief pause. Then in the same calm, monotone voice, she replied, we just need clarification. Insurance policies require homeowners to secure their property. Without that documentation, coverage may be affected. It felt like a punch in the gut. Here I was, traumatized, with my home reduced to ash, and now the very company I had paid premiums to for decades was suggesting that it was my fault. My hands gripped the phone so tightly it felt like they might break. I had nothing to do with this, I shouted, unable to contain the flood of emotion. The fire started because a man was cold. I secured my house. I followed every rule you could ask me to follow. Rachel's tone didn't change. In fact, the calmness made it feel more infuriating. Mr. Anderson, I understand your frustration. I truly do. But the policy requires us to investigate the circumstances. Please provide any additional documentation of security systems, locks, or inspections. I slammed the phone down. The sound echoed in the empty living room of my temporary apartment. I paced back and forth, trying to control my anger. How could they be so cold, so clinical, so dismissive of my human experience? I had lost everything, and now I had to fight to prove that I wasn't to blame. The next day, I requested an in-person meeting. I had to look someone in the eyes, someone human, and make them understand the weight of what I had endured. Rachel agreed, and we set up an appointment at the local office. When I walked in, I noticed the sterile environment, fluorescent lights, bland gray walls, and rows of waiting chairs. Rachel greeted me with a polite smile, as if nothing had changed. We sat down across from each other at a small table. She placed a folder in front of her. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Anderson," she said. "I reviewed the documents you submitted, but there are still some gaps, specifically security measures, property maintenance records, and proof of ownership for certain items." I stared at her, trying to summon the calm I didn't have. "Gaps? There are no gaps. My house burned down. How am I supposed to provide receipts for appliances and furniture that no longer exist? I can't take pictures of what's gone." Rachel nodded, seemingly empathetic, but her words betrayed the formal rigidity of a trained bureaucrat. "I understand that this is difficult, Mr. Anderson, but without these documents, the claim cannot be processed fully. The policy states that the insured must provide proof of ownership and security measures." I felt a hot anger rising inside me, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your voice shake. "So let me get this straight," I said, leaning forward. "I lose my home, everything I own is destroyed, and now you're blaming me because a man tried to warm himself in my house? How is this fair? How is this even legal?" Rachel opened her folder, pulling out the fire report. The report clearly states that the ignition was accidental, but it also notes the point of entry. "Policies require property to be reasonably secured. This is standard procedure." I could feel the frustration boiling over. "Standard procedure? This is my life, my memories, my home. You're hiding behind words while I'm left with nothing." Her face remained composed, almost robotic. "I understand your feelings, Mr. Anderson, but the policy requires us to verify these details. Once we have complete documentation, we can move forward." I wanted to scream, to throw the folder across the room. Instead, I took a deep breath and tried to regain control. "Fine, what else do you need? Tell me exactly what I have to provide. I'll do everything I can, but don't act like this is my fault. It's not. I didn't cause this fire." Rachel recited her checklist again, carefully, deliberately. Proof of security, inventory of items, photos, receipts, and any prior maintenance records. Each item felt like an impossible mountain to climb. I left the office that day feeling more powerless than ever. Back at my temporary apartment, I sat on the couch staring at the phone, wondering how my life had come to this point. I had done everything right, locked my doors, maintained my property, paid my premiums faithfully. Yet here I was, treated like a suspect in my own disaster. I started drafting emails, trying to anticipate every objection the insurance company could raise. I called neighbors who could testify that my property had been maintained. I contacted vendors to see if they could provide proof of purchase. Every step was exhausting, mentally and emotionally. The insurance company's subtle blame weighed on me like a physical burden. It was one thing to deal with the fire, but another entirely to have the people I trusted to protect me question my responsibility. Every call, every email, every interaction became a confrontation. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the empty lot where my home had once stood. Smoke still lingered in the air. I thought about the man who had inadvertently started the fire, the police report, the fire investigators, and now the insurance officer. And I realized if I didn't fight back, I might lose more than just my house. I might lose the truth. I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, I will not let them blame me. I will gather every scrap of proof, every witness, every document. I will fight this, no matter what it takes. And with that, the battle lines were drawn. The fire had destroyed my home, but the real fight was just beginning, against the people who were supposed to protect me, yet seemed determined to make me take the fall. By the fifth day, the tension had reached a boiling point. I felt like I was living under a constant storm, one where every interaction with the insurance company tore at my nerves and drained my energy. I had spent hours compiling what little proof I could salvage. Photographs of the charred remains, statements from neighbors, the police report, the fire investigation report. But each email I sent seemed to vanish into a bureaucratic void, only to be met with new demands. I picked up the phone and called Rachel again. My hands shook, and I could feel my chest tightening as the seconds ticked by while the call connected. Mr. Anderson, she said, calm and professional, I see you've submitted additional documentation. Thank you. There are still some outstanding items we need. Outstanding items, I snapped, my patience fraying. I've given you everything I possibly can. Receipts, photos, statements, proof of property maintenance. Everything is gone in the fire. What else do you want from me? There was a pause, and then Rachel's voice returned, unwavering. We need verification of security measures and more detailed proof of ownership for certain high-value items. These are standard policy requirements. I slammed my fist on the table. The sound echoed through my temporary apartment, startling my cat, who bolted under the couch. Standard requirements? I shouted. I've lost everything. I'm supposed to produce receipts from ashes, memories, and smoke. Do you understand what it feels like to lose your home and then be blamed for it? Rachel's voice remained calm, almost too calm, which only fueled my anger. Mr. Anderson, I understand your frustration, but I must follow policy guidelines. Without the requested documentation, your claim may not be processed fully. I felt something inside me snap. I grabbed my laptop and started typing an email, fingers flying across the keyboard, words spilling out of me in a torrent of emotion. This is not just about paperwork. This is my life, my home, my memories. How can you be so cold, so detached? How can you ask for proof of ownership when my house has been reduced to ashes? You are blaming me for a tragedy that wasn't my fault. After sending the email, I immediately called back. Rachel, did you get my message? I demanded. Yes, Mr. Anderson, she said, her voice steady, almost surgical in its precision. We've received your email. I understand that this is an emotional time. But I must remind you that policy requirements exist to protect both you and the company. Please provide the additional details as requested. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. The polite phrasing, the calm tone, the careful repetition. It was all designed to deflect responsibility, to keep me on edge, and to make me doubt myself. But I refused to back down. Do you hear me? I shouted, my voice trembling. I've lost my home. I've lost everything. And you're treating me like I caused this fire? Do you have any idea what that feels like? Rachel paused, and for a split second I thought I heard hesitation. But then her voice returned to its monotone. I understand that this is difficult, Mr. Anderson, but I cannot alter policy. The documentation is required for claim processing. I threw my hands up in exasperation and left the phone dangling on the table. I paced the apartment trying to control my emotions, but it was impossible. The combination of grief, frustration, and anger was almost unbearable. Every corner of my life felt like it had been burned to the ground, and now the one institution I relied on for help was subtly telling me I was at fault. I remembered the fire investigator's words from a few days ago. Accidental ignition, human source, no foul play, that should have been enough. Yet the insurance officer seemed determined to find a reason to blame me. I realized that I would have to be relentless, to fight not just for the claim, but for my dignity and for the truth. The next day, I went to the insurance office in person. I knew that sitting across from Rachel, looking her in the eyes, might make a difference. Perhaps seeing the devastation firsthand would pierce the corporate detachment. When I arrived, the office was as sterile as ever. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, gray walls surrounded me, and the smell of office coffee lingered in the air. Rachel greeted me with a polite smile, shaking my hand briefly before gesturing toward a conference room. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Anderson, she said. We'll review your documents together. I set down my folder, heavy with printed photographs, statements, and copies of police and fire reports. I met her gaze, and for the first time I let my anger surface fully. Rachel, I need you to understand, I said, my voice shaking. My house burned down, everything I own is gone. I have spent days trying to provide whatever proof I can, and now you are treating me like I am to blame. How can you look at me and still say that this is a policy requirement? She remained calm, flipping through my folder. Mr. Anderson, I am reviewing your documentation. There are gaps that require clarification. This is standard procedure. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound sharp and echoing in the quiet room. Standard procedure. You are asking me to provide proof for things that no longer exist. You are blaming me for a man trying to survive in the cold for a fire that was not my fault. I will not be treated like a criminal in my own tragedy. Rachel looked up, her eyes steady, unflinching. Mr. Anderson, I understand your frustration. I truly do, but I cannot bypass policy. If you can provide additional documentation, we can move forward with your claim. I felt my chest tighten, my hands trembling, my voice raw. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake her until she understood. But instead, I sat back, taking deep breaths, trying to collect myself. The truth was clear. I had to fight smarter, not just louder. I needed witnesses, verification, proof that couldn't be ignored. As I left the office, the weight of the confrontation lingered. The fire had destroyed my home, but the real battle had just begun. The insurance company was questioning my responsibility, testing my resolve, and I knew I couldn't falter. That night, I sat in my temporary apartment, surrounded by boxes of essentials I had salvaged. I reviewed every photograph, every statement, every scrap of evidence. I began to plan my next moves, gather more testimony from neighbors, request official documents from vendors, and prepare for every possible argument the insurance officer could make. I whispered to myself, a quiet vow: I will not be blamed for this. I will fight for what is mine. I will not let them win. The confrontation had been emotionally exhausting, but it had also strengthened my resolve. The insurance company might try to paint me as negligent, but I knew the truth, and I was determined to make them see it. By the sixth day, I realized something I had been reluctant to admit. This was no longer just about my house. It was about surviving the system itself. The fire had left me devastated, but the insurance company was weaponizing its bureaucracy against me. Every interaction seemed designed to exhaust me, to make me feel powerless, to bend me into submission. It started with a single email from Rachel. The subject line read, "Additional documentation required, claim 4582. I opened it, heart sinking. The list inside seemed endless. Proof of ownership for all electronics, including TV, laptop, and kitchen appliances, receipts or invoices for all furniture, documentation of any security inspections conducted in the past 5 years, copies of maintenance records for the roof, heating, and electrical systems, detailed inventory of personal items destroyed." I stared at the email, unable to comprehend how I could provide these. Everything I owned, every document, every receipt, every scrap of proof had been destroyed in the fire. I had spent days trying to reconstruct as much as I could, and now they demanded more. I called Rachel, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. "Rachel, I've already submitted everything I possibly can," I said. "Most of these items, they're gone. The house burned down, there's nothing left." "I understand, Mr. Anderson," she replied, her voice smooth, professional, completely unmoved by the emotion in my tone. "However, in order to process the claim, we require verifiable proof of ownership for high-value items. This is standard procedure." Standard procedure. The words were a dagger. I felt the crushing weight of bureaucracy pressing down on me. It wasn't enough that I had lost my home. Now I had to prove to faceless administrators that I deserved to be compensated for it. I spent the next several hours on the phone, contacting every vendor, store, and bank I could think of. I called appliance stores to request copies of purchase records, reached out to neighbors who had received gifts from me, and even tried to dig up old online receipts. Each phone call was met with polite apologies. "I'm sorry, sir, our records only go back 2 years." Or, "Without an account number, we cannot retrieve your purchase." At one point, I sank into a chair, head in my hands, feeling utterly defeated. How could they demand proof of things I no longer had any way to prove? Every day brought new forms, new requests, new clarifications. I was drowning in a sea of red tape. And then came the letter that nearly broke me. It was an official notice, printed on thick paper, stating, "Without full documentation, your claim may be denied in part or in full. Please submit the requested materials within 10 business days." I stared at the letter, incredulous. Denied? After everything I had lost, after submitting weeks of documentation, after cooperating fully, they were threatening to blame me for the fire indirectly by claiming insufficient proof. It was as if the fire hadn't been enough. They wanted me to feel powerless, humiliated, and small. Determined not to be beaten, I decided to escalate. I requested a meeting with a senior claims supervisor, hoping that speaking with someone higher up would make a difference. I prepared meticulously, compiling every scrap of evidence, every photograph, every police and fire report, and even statements from neighbors who could attest to my responsible maintenance of the property. The day of the meeting, I walked into the office with my folder under my arm, my heart hammering in my chest. The supervisor, a middle-aged man named Mr. Green, looked at me over his glasses with a neutral expression. "Mr. Anderson, I've reviewed your file," he said. "It's extensive. However, there are still gaps in documentation. For example, there are missing receipts for furniture and electronics and no evidence of recent property inspections." I slammed my folder on the desk. "Missing receipts? The house burned down, everything is gone. How can you possibly expect me to provide what no longer exists?" Mr. Green adjusted his glasses, maintaining a calm, professional tone. "I understand this is a difficult time, but policy requirements are in place to ensure accuracy and prevent fraud. We cannot process claims without verification." I felt a wave of frustration and anger wash over me. "Verification? Fraud? You're telling me that because a man was cold and accidentally started a fire, I am now under suspicion?" I've cooperated fully, provided statements, photographs, police and fire reports, and you are still asking for more. Mr. Anderson, I am not accusing you of anything, Green said evenly. We simply need all requested documentation. Once received, your claim can be processed. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tight, my hands shaking. The bureaucratic machine was relentless. It didn't care about the fire, the homeless man, the trauma I had endured. All it cared about was paperwork, policy, and procedure. Over the next few days, I threw myself into gathering what I could. I scoured old emails, called old landlords, vendors, even credit card companies. I tried to reconstruct the unreconstructible. But no matter what I did, every answer seemed to generate two more questions. The hurdles were impossible, the requirements endless, and the frustration unbearable. I realized something important. If I didn't fight strategically, I would be crushed under the weight of this bureaucracy. The insurance company's subtle blame had shifted from polite skepticism to institutional pressure, and it was designed to wear me down, to make me doubt myself. But I refused. I wrote detailed summaries of the destroyed items, photocopied statements from neighbors, and compiled the fire investigation and police reports into a single, neat folder. I reviewed every email from Rachel and Mr. Green, preparing responses for every potential objection. Every day I reminded myself, they may control the paperwork, but they cannot control the truth. By the end of the week, I had a stack of documents taller than my forearm, a mountain of evidence painstakingly reconstructed from memory, testimony, and digital backups. I knew the insurance company might still find reasons to delay, to deny, or to blame me indirectly, but I was ready. The fire had destroyed my home, but it would not destroy my resolve. The insurance company could wield bureaucracy like a weapon, but I would meet every challenge with preparation, persistence, and determination. I would not be silenced, I would not be intimidated, and I would not allow them to blame me for something I did not cause. By the time the 7th day rolled around, I had reached a point where the bureaucracy and impossible demands of the insurance company had become almost unbearable. Every phone call, every email, every meeting left me exhausted, anxious, and angry. And yet, despite all the documentation I had painstakingly gathered, the subtle blaming continued. It was clear now, I couldn't rely solely on paperwork or polite appeals. I needed something bigger, public attention. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank screen, the cursor blinking at me like a ticking clock. Social media, news outlets, local community groups, all of it could be used to tell my story. I typed the first words carefully. Yesterday, my house burned down due to an accidental fire caused by a homeless man seeking warmth. The fire department and police reports confirm this, yet the insurance company is making it nearly impossible for me to claim what's rightfully mine. I shared photos. The charred remains of the living room, the collapsed roof, the scorched furniture, and the remnants of personal items. Each picture told a story of loss, of devastation, of a life reduced to ash in one night. I included excerpts from the fire report, highlighting the accidental ignition and the human element, hoping it would paint the picture clearly. The response was immediate. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers reached out with support, expressing disbelief and outrage. "That's unbelievable. How can they do that?" one comment read. Another said, "You should take this to the local news. People need to know." Each message strengthened my resolve. I was no longer alone. The public could bear witness to what was happening. I reached out to a local journalist, Connor, who had briefly interviewed me at the scene of the fire. He responded within hours, asking for details, copies of the fire report, photographs, and the email correspondence with the insurance company. I sent everything, careful to preserve the sequence and content, showing the repeated delays and subtle blame in every message. A week later, a story appeared online. Homeowner loses house to accidental fire, faces bureaucratic roadblocks with insurance company. The piece highlighted the tragedy, the man who had inadvertently caused the fire, and the struggles with documentation imposed by the insurance company. It didn't sensationalize the homeless man. It was a human story about loss and accountability. I watched as neighbors shared the article on social media, commenting with support and outrage. Local community forums buzzed with discussions. If this happened to my neighbor, would the insurance do the same thing? And this is why insurance companies need oversight. Each share, each comment, each piece of attention added pressure. I also created a video documenting my experience, narrating the sequence of events with raw honesty. The fire, the investigation, the pile of ashes that had once been my home, and the impossible demands of the insurance company. I uploaded it to YouTube, tagging it with terms like insurance dispute, homeowner disaster, fire tragedy, consumer rights, and fight for justice. Within hours, the video began to gain traction. Views climbed steadily, and the comments poured in. "This is insane. The insurance company can't get away with this. I hope he wins. It was invigorating, the first time since the fire that I felt like I had a fighting chance. The public scrutiny now served as a shield, a way to keep the insurance company accountable. The attention worked faster than I expected. Rachel called the next day, her tone slightly less composed. "Mr. Anderson, we noticed your public posts and the media coverage. I assure you we are reviewing your claim carefully and will respond to all outstanding documentation requests." I held my breath. The subtle shift was clear. The insurance company was suddenly more attentive, more cautious. The public had forced them to acknowledge my plight, but I knew better than to relax. Bureaucracy could still be weaponized against me if I let my guard down. Over the next few days, the local news station reached out to do a feature interview. I recounted the fire, the homeless man who had unintentionally caused it, and the insurance company's repeated demands and subtle blame. They filmed the burned lot, my temporary living space, and the stacks of documents I had painstakingly reconstructed. The story was broadcast during the evening news, and the response was overwhelming. Calls, emails, and messages poured in, all expressing support and outrage. The insurance company, previously indifferent and cold, now faced mounting pressure. Complaints were filed with the state insurance regulator. Online forums and social media amplified the story, framing it as a case study in bureaucratic neglect. It was no longer just my fight, it had become a public cause. I realized then that going public had changed the entire dynamic. The company could no longer ignore me or treat me as an inconvenience. Every action they took now risked public backlash, scrutiny, and reputational damage. For the first time since the fire, I felt a sense of control. That evening, as I sat among my scattered documents, I reflected on what had just happened. The fire had destroyed my home, but going public had rebuilt something else: leverage, visibility, and support. I had taken what felt like a personal tragedy and turned it into a tool to hold the powerful accountable. But I knew the fight was not over. Bureaucratic hurdles, document requests, and subtle blame would continue. The insurance company would still test me at every turn, yet now I had allies, witnesses, and the public's eye watching, and I would not let them falter. I whispered to myself as I reviewed the growing list of media mentions and online comments. They cannot ignore the truth. I will continue to fight. My house may be gone, but my voice will be heard. The fire had taken everything from me, but it had also ignited a resolve I had never known. And as the story spread, I knew the next steps in this battle would be decisive. The insurance company could no longer operate in the shadows. Public scrutiny had become my weapon, and I was ready to use it. By the 8th day, the story of my fire and insurance struggle had gained significant traction. News outlets were covering it, neighbors were rallying in support, and social media had amplified the outrage. The insurance company, which had once ignored my calls and subtly blamed me for the fire, now faced real scrutiny. Their carefully maintained bureaucracy and polite, clinical detachment were beginning to crack. I received a call from Rachel early in the morning. The tone was different, less polished, slightly tense. "Mr. Anderson, due to public attention and your recent submissions, we're escalating your claim to senior management. A review is scheduled, and you may be contacted by the state insurance regulator." I exhaled, relief mixed with lingering anxiety. This was my chance to finally confront the system, to make them accountable for every delay and every subtle accusation. Within the next 2 days, I received a formal notice from the state insurance regulatory office. They had opened an inquiry based on my complaint and media coverage. The letter outlined a series of steps: detailed documentation of my property, a written account of the events, and a request for the insurance company's internal claim review process. It felt like a lifeline, an official acknowledgement that the insurer could not simply dismiss my claim. I spent hours compiling a comprehensive evidence packet: photographs of the burned house, the fire investigation report, police statements, my correspondence with Rachel, and witness affidavits from neighbors who could attest to my home maintenance and security measures. Each page was meticulously labeled, cross-referenced, and organized. I was determined to leave no room for denial or manipulation. The state office assigned an investigator, Ms. Henderson, to my case. She called to introduce herself, a calm but authoritative presence on the line. "Mr. Anderson, I will be reviewing your file and the insurance company's handling of your claim. I will need full access to all documents, communications, and evidence." I explained everything: the fire, the accidental cause, the homeless man, the weeks of bureaucracy, the subtle blaming. Henderson listened patiently, asking clarifying questions, but she was precise, focused, and thorough. For the first time, I felt someone on my side, someone who actually understood the systemic power imbalance I was facing. Meanwhile, the insurance company called me to schedule a formal in-person review. This was the moment I had been waiting for, a face-to-face showdown. I walked into their office carrying my evidence packet, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. Rachel greeted me with a polite smile, but her eyes betrayed tension. She motioned toward a conference room where Mr. Green, the senior claims supervisor, and a lawyer from the company were waiting. Their smiles were tight, professional, but I could sense the unease. Public scrutiny and state oversight had changed the rules. "Mr. Anderson," Green began, "thank you for coming. We've reviewed your documentation and the regulatory inquiry is ongoing. We're here to discuss the claim, clarify any remaining questions, and work toward resolution." I set my packet on the table, my fingers brushing over every meticulously organized page. "Clarify? There's nothing left to clarify. My house burned down, everything I owned was destroyed, and yet for days I've been treated like a suspect in my own disaster." Rachel spoke up, trying to maintain control. "Mr. Anderson, our goal is to process your claim fairly. We just need to ensure all requirements are met." I leaned forward, voice firm. "Fairly. You've demanded receipts for things that no longer exist, proof of security for a home that was locked, and yet you continue to blame me subtly for a fire I didn't cause. I've provided witness statements, police reports, fire investigation reports, photographs, and reconstructed inventories. How much more do you need before you admit that this was not my fault?" The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Anderson, our records indicate some missing documentation. That's all we are noting." I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to back down. I opened my evidence packet and began laying out every piece of proof, explaining each page, each photograph, each statement. I cited the fire investigation's findings, emphasizing the accidental ignition and human error, not negligence. I highlighted the reconstructed inventory of my property, showing approximate values and corroborating neighbor statements. Green shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Rachel fidgeted. Even the lawyer glanced down at the documents, flipping through the pages more rapidly than before. The pressure had shifted. Public exposure, the regulatory inquiry, and my meticulous preparation had turned the balance. After what felt like hours of discussion, Henderson from the state office joined the meeting via video call. Her presence was calm but commanding. She asked pointed questions. Did the insurance company provide clear instructions? Were you treated fairly? Were you blamed for the fire? I answered truthfully, detailing every subtle accusation, every bureaucratic hurdle. Henderson nodded and turned to Green. "We will be reviewing the company's handling of this claim. Any denial or undue delay will be noted. Mr. Anderson's documentation appears thorough and credible." The tension in the room was palpable. Green's professional mask slipped slightly. Rachel's calm facade seemed forced. The power dynamics had shifted. The homeowner, once a passive victim of bureaucracy, now held leverage in the form of evidence, public attention, and regulatory oversight. I left the meeting exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time in over a week, I felt hopeful. The insurance company had been forced to confront its actions, its subtle blame, and the unreasonable hurdles it had imposed. Public pressure and regulatory oversight had leveled the playing field. That evening, I uploaded a short video update to my social media and YouTube channel, narrating the events of the day. I included photos of my evidence packet and summarized the meeting, careful to maintain factual accuracy. The response was overwhelming, hundreds of comments of support, neighbors pledging to testify if necessary, and local news outlets requesting follow-up interviews. For the first time, I realized something profound. I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for accountability, for fairness, for the idea that victims should not be blamed for accidents beyond their control. The fire had taken my home, but it had ignited something far larger, a determination to stand up to the system and ensure justice was served. As I sat in my temporary apartment reviewing the growing stream of messages, I whispered to myself, "They cannot deny the truth. I will not be blamed. I will see this through, no matter what it takes." The showdown was not over, but the tides had turned. The insurance company, once cold and untouchable, now faced the consequences of their subtle blame and bureaucratic cruelty, and I was ready to see it through to the end. The 9th day felt like the longest and shortest day of my life. After weeks of chaos, frustration, and relentless bureaucracy, everything had led to this moment, the final push toward resolution. The insurance company, now under regulatory scrutiny and public attention, had no room left to maneuver. They could no longer ignore the documentation I had painstakingly compiled, the statements from neighbors, and the media coverage that had shone a spotlight on their subtle blame and unreasonable demands. I arrived at the insurance office early, clutching a thick folder of evidence and emails. The conference room was tense, Quiet, the kind of silence that makes every footstep and breath feel amplified. Rachel and Mr. Green were already seated, their expressions polite but tight, the professional facade that had previously concealed their detachment now slightly frayed. The company lawyer sat beside them, meticulously reviewing notes. Before anyone could speak, I set the evidence packet on the table. This contains everything I've collected: photographs, witness statements, police and fire reports, reconstructed inventories. Every request the company has made has been met. I'm here today to resolve this claim, finally, without further delay or blame. Rachel opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. I will not be accused or blamed for a fire I did not cause. I will not be subjected to impossible demands for documentation that no longer exists. The state regulatory office is monitoring this claim, and public attention is on the record. There will be no further excuses or deflections. The room was silent. I could feel the shift. The insurance company could no longer operate with impunity. Every subtle insinuation of negligence, every bureaucratic hurdle had been documented and made visible. They knew it. Mr. Green leaned forward, clearing his throat. Mr. Anderson, after reviewing your documentation and considering the regulatory oversight, we are prepared to move forward with your claim. The company acknowledges that the fire was accidental, caused by external factors, and that you took reasonable precautions to secure your property. I exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering tension. So, the claim will be paid in full? Yes, Green said, his voice measured. The full claim amount will be processed, and payment will be issued promptly. He apologized for the delays and any distress caused during the claims process. It was hard to believe at first. Weeks of battling bureaucracy, subtle blame, and emotional exhaustion had culminated in this moment. I felt a mixture of triumph, vindication, and residual anger at the way the process had been handled. Rachel, for the first time, seemed human rather than a polished corporate mask. Mr. Anderson, I understand how difficult this has been. We regret any additional stress caused. Your persistence and thorough documentation were essential in resolving this claim. I nodded, still processing. It shouldn't have taken weeks of bureaucracy, media attention, and regulatory oversight for a claim like this to be honored, but I appreciate the resolution. The insurance lawyer made a final note in the file. Payment will be issued directly to Mr. Anderson's account within the next few business days. We consider this matter closed. I left the office feeling exhausted but triumphant. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city. I stopped for a moment, staring at the horizon, thinking about the house that had once stood proudly, now reduced to ashes. Everything I had owned, all my memories, had been gone, but justice finally had been served. Over the next few days, the payment arrived. It covered the full value of the destroyed home, personal belongings, and additional living expenses while I had been displaced. It wasn't just money. It was validation, a tangible acknowledgement that I had been wronged, that the insurance company had tried to subtly blame me, and that persistence, evidence, and public scrutiny could force accountability. I also received a letter from the state insurance regulator, noting that the company had been found to have delayed the claim unnecessarily and had imposed unfair documentation requirements. It was a formal acknowledgement that their bureaucracy had been weaponized against me, and that their subtle blame was unacceptable. I shared the resolution online, posting a video summarizing the ordeal. The fire, the homeless man who accidentally caused it, the bureaucratic nightmare, the subtle blaming, the public support, and finally, the victory. Comments flooded in. Congratulations, expressions of outrage at the company, and encouragement for others facing similar struggles. It was a reminder that my fight had not only helped me, but also highlighted systemic issues for others. As I sat in my temporary apartment, now beginning to rebuild my life, I reflected on the journey. The fire had destroyed my home, but it had ignited something much larger: determination, resilience, and the realization that accountability could be demanded, even from faceless institutions. I had faced bureaucratic indifference, subtle blame, and impossible demands, and I had prevailed. I whispered to myself quietly, almost like a vow: no one should be blamed for tragedy they did not cause. I will stand up, I will fight, and I will make my voice heard. That night, as I looked out the window at the dark lot where my home had stood, I allowed myself a moment of peace. The ashes were still there, reminders of what had been lost, but they also represented a journey that had tested me, shaped me, and ultimately proven that persistence, evidence, and courage could overcome even the most relentless bureaucracy. Justice had been served. The fire had taken my home, but it had not taken my resolve. And as I finally allowed myself to exhale, I knew one thing for certain. I had not only reclaimed my claim, but also my dignity, my voice, and my faith in standing up for what was right.